In perhaps one of the most underappreciated handguns of the era, John Browning had pushed the limits of the blowback action. But would anyone use it? Hi, I'm Othais, and this is not exactly the gun you're thinking. Instead, it's the FN Model 1903, a beefier, military-grade Browning action. Let's get it over to the light box. Weighing in at 2.2 pounds and with an overall length of 8.1 inches, this is a big boy Browning pistol. It has a detachable box magazine, single stack, 7 rounds of 9x20 Browning long. More on that cartridge in a moment. Anyway, before you get into this episode, you're going to want to take a little trip down memory lane to our earlier episode on the FN 1900. And if not, well, woe be unto you. In that episode, we covered Browning's first commercially successful pistol, a semi-automatic blowback design, and the first slide-operated handgun in the market. Now, the 1900 was a huge success, to the point that the name Browning became a proprietary eponym for pistol in a number of places around the world, and it was a big stinking deal. As we know, that Browning stood for the one and only John Moses Browning. I think we've covered this man well enough now to not need too much of an introduction at this point. What I should say is he was selling pistol technology to both Colt and FN. Now, as you'll recall from the previous episode, FN was trying to stay alive with its own parent company, trying to squeeze it out of existence because they just didn't really want the competition of this combination entity of Liège gun makers. It's a big thing. We've talked about it before, and we'll get into more detail in a certain rifle later. But they wanted anything innovative and anything they could sell, and they got both on Browning's what would be the Model 1899 design. They rushed it into production and then attempted to sell it to both the civilian and armed forces markets. But for all that pushing, 32 ACP wasn't really a priority cartridge for military forces, and only Belgium really took the bite on that particular hook. And in doing so, they required a number of necessary changes before they would adopt it, which resulted in the 1900 model that we know today. But those changes to manufacturing created waste and cost time and money. FN would learn not to start large-scale production until after securing a sizable contract and polishing out the details and features. Granted, they could have just kept making the 1899 and sold that to civilian-only market, but by going ahead and getting a military contract first, they could double dip on all military and civilian pistols going forward. Minor regrets aside, the FN 1900 was a very successful pistol, and it created an entire pocket pistol market, and it did very well by FN, really established FN in the public eye. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to get jealous of sort of untapped potential. And so when they looked over at what Colt was doing, well, they got pretty dang green with envy, because Colt had chosen not to go anywhere near this pocket pistol concept of Browning's at first. We'll see about that next time. Instead, Colt had decided that they wanted military contracts right from the get-go, and they focused on Browning's larger caliber, larger power, lock breech designs, things that they could sell to the government, specifically the US government first and foremost. Colt would start with a gas lever operated pistol that John Browning designed way back in 1894. Now, of course, we know the piston would be abandoned, but if we look carefully, the core characteristics of a Browning pistol are here in this design. Much of the trigger, hammer, the flat springs set behind the grips, and the general frame shape are all right here from the start. Abandoning the gas piston, he would develop a short recoil action that used a full slide and tipping barrel lock that we're pretty familiar with today with some minor simplifications. More on this whole evolution when we get to the 1911, but it resulted in this, the Model 1900. The features embodied in this gun were honestly extremely advanced. Any modern shooter could pick up one of these today and use it just fine with little to no instruction. That's because, in a way, almost all modern semi-automatic handguns emerge from this root ancestor. The mechanisms certainly change, but the general shape, layout, and of course the slide remain. Don't take it for granted that guns are gun-shaped. That had to be invented. Skipping a bit ahead, the gun would also be paired with some minor improvements in a major upgrade in the form of an automatic slide stop sometime around 1901. Here we see it applied on the later model 1902. What this does is hold the slide open after the last shot has been fired, allowing someone in the heat of battle to be very clear that their gun will go bango no more until you reload it. Now, I'm sure the brightest among you right now are wondering how the heck this works, because you have Colt, you have FN, and you have John Browning down the middle, and they're both using elements of his patents, or whole patents entirely, but they build on top of each other. I mean, we've seen some pretty radical guns that are built entirely around the concept of not infringing on what Browning was doing, and there's no way that Colt's military automatics are not using some of the technology from his civilian / semi-military 1900 and vice versa. How can these two companies possibly rely on the same information and not infringe on each other all the time? Well, they couldn't. I mean, they had to actually overlap production, and for that, they would need a negotiation. Johnny B had, as far back as 1897, worked out a truce on both FN and Colt sharing pistol patents and designs. They would divide into separate sales regions. Colt got the US, Britain, and Ireland. FN took Europe, and, well, most everything else. So I guess it's a good thing that Americans tend to buy a lot of guns. And that is where things stood when 1900-ish, 1901-ish, FN goes to Browning and says, hey man, we are doing killer on the commercial side. We have a great pocket pistol, but we're looking at what you're doing with Colt and we're getting a little envious. Is there any way we can get some of that military contract style pistol action? And somewhere in this, I can't say for sure, I don't have notes or letters back and forth, there was a shakedown of what does the European market really need? Do we have to go with a lock breech that seems to be Colt for holding very tightly to that technology, blah, blah, blah. What they did is it appears that Browning took his Colt developed technology and stripped out the locking action and kept a lot of the other features in order to develop a powerful blowback prototype in 1901. Here we have the general layout of the trigger, springs, hammer, and slide that have been carried over, along with an improved slide lock. This prototype would also contain his new automatic grip safety. It was designed to prevent negligent discharges in an era of poor trigger discipline and holsterless pocket carrying. The new gun was paired with a new cartridge, also adapted from his Colt pistols. Here he reduced the length of the .38 ACP and lowered the charge to make it compatible with the simplified blowback pistol design, although it's still a bit rough for an unlocked breech. And with very, very few modifications. I mean, they simply kind of made that hold open lever a little worse, and that was about it. They would go ahead and take this prototype and its cartridge and roll them together to produce the Modèle de Guerre, or later known as the Grand Model, which honestly then got used in another pistol. These names get very confusing, and eventually they retroactively called it the FN Model 1903, which is how we are referring to it today. Marketing and inventory rarely coincide very easily back at the turn of the century. Alright, so they now have a military handgun, and of course they're going to rush it into immediate, overwhelming production. No, that would have been wrong because they learned their lesson on that earlier model 1899. Instead, for this pistol, they'd make just a couple dozen if they could. I'm not even sure if they got above 100. Instead, they made dealer samples. They sent them out to their salesmen. They sent them out for trials boards. They sent them out to try to get some attention. Then they would consider making them. One of the first to inquire would be Norway, who requested 100 pieces for trials as an artillery pistol. Apparently this was not enough to lure FN into full production, perhaps because of the limited scope of adoption even if the guns were accepted. They sent no samples. But neighboring Sweden was also interested, and they were looking for a generally adopted pistol. Considering both countries shared an FN agent, Paul Berghaus, we'll have to thank him for the Grand Model finally being produced. Now, luckily for FN, Sweden's first wave of tests would require only 2 pistols. They would take in pairs of the best available designs for quick comparison. So the FN 1903 would compete against names including the Luger, Colt, Mannlicher, Fromer, Bergman, and others. Now these trials would carry on into further detail, obviously, but Sweden was not a participant in the war and we're a focused show. Hopefully we can come back to that story later. The shortest version of this is eventually the Luger and FN 1903 went head to head, and the Luger was deemed superior, but the 1903 won, mostly because of its simplicity and reliability, considering that blowback action, especially in cold weather. Also, I'm quite sure it was cheaper. It was adopted as the Swedish M07, or model of 1907. Sweden would order 10,000 of these guys in their first batch, and then never really order another batch quite that big again, although they did order batches. Additionally, the guns would be sold from FN straight to officers in the Swedish military because they would buy their own guns direct sometimes. And because of that setup, these things started selling to officers in other countries who were allowed to purchase whatever they wanted and thought that this was an excellent gun, so they would buy it. Now, there's really no difference between a commercial FN 1903 and an original Swedish 1907 because they didn't start producing this until they had the guaranteed contract. So, don't go looking for a lot of detailed difference unless you're talking about a much later Swedish M07 when some changes will work themselves in. Now, there may be a couple dealer samples out there. I'd be very interested to see one because the only notes I saw said that the sights were changed slightly and there was a stronger safety added to the slide. Anyway, we're going on about this a lot and you guys want to see the gun. So now that we know what we're dealing with, let's take a closer look. There you go, guys. It's a handgun. All right, so this should look very familiar to a lot of people for a lot of reasons. Think about the fact that this was a 1901 prototype, almost completely like this before this finally was released in 07, only because it was adopted. This gun could have been ready to go in 1901, almost exactly like it is. That's fantastic. I mean, think of every other gun we've seen from that period. This is very, very advanced stuff. Even though we are dealing with a simple slide-operated, blowback pistol. Now, from this position, we can see with my patented plastic pokey hand that we have our automatic slide lock right here on the right. So as I withdraw that, it's going to rise. When the gun is empty, which it is, boom, locks are open. Now, there was a lever right here, a thumb pad, honestly just added to the edge of the lever, that would have released this in the original prototype, but the Swedes opted to do without. So that means that you have to now remove the magazine, which is a heel release, Mae's absolute favorite. So release and pull, and I'm sorry, I'm just doing this kind of awkwardly so you guys can at least see some of it. Magazine out, we've got a cutaway on the magazine so that we can see down in there, apply oil, and then I believe there may be some loading tools to assist with this, although being a single stack 7-rounder, it's not that bad. Push this to the side for a moment and flip her back up. We can release our slide by just pulling it back and letting go at this point. That's really the only way to get this guy back forward. Again, I don't know why they didn't keep the prototype's thumb pad. Flipping her around, we're going to see that we have two safety systems. One is the grip here, so that we cannot discharge this gun without depressing that. And we have a manual thumb-operated safety right here. This also notches into the slide to keep the slide closed when she's in safe. It serves another role for takedown by engaging this notch here, although we have one thing to do before that. If we look at the front, there's a barrel bushing, a very familiar one to a lot of people who know American handguns. And so you can take your magazine toe and use it to depress right there and flip this guy 180 degrees, which is easier said than done on camera. I'm gonna give it one quick shot, but boy is she stiff. Ooh, come on. Hey, 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 hey. I get extra points for that, right guys? So 180 and out. Now we can set this bushing aside along with our magazine. We'll take her to our takedown position. So I'm just manually lifting that notch into the slide. There we go. Or rather the lever into the notch in the slide. And notice, by the way, this picks up every fingerprint you lay on it with this beautiful high blue. Anyway, from this position, the barrel lugs are now aligned inside that slide and frame so that it can be rotated. All right, sorry about that. I had a little bit of goop built up in there. I'm gonna turn her 90 degrees left. You'll feel her notch forward just a little bit. just a little pip. And at that point, you can carefully hold your slide and release your takedown lever, let her off the front. Now, let's see why we have to be careful. That's because we have this spring right here, big old recoil sucker, and it'll throw it right across the room for you if you aren't careful. So I'm gonna pull the frame away, pull my spring away, or I'm gonna twist on my spring until it comes loose a bit and fights me to the death. There we go. Basically, just so anybody's curious, this guy was binding inside of his lip. I just gave him a little thumb press and he popped down. Now, I can rotate the barrel back around again so that my lugs are down and pull her free. And you notice I did have a little schmutz in there. All right, so this system honestly seems to be derived from the locking system on Browning's other military designs. Although in this case, all it's doing is retaining the barrel against the frame in a fixed position, but allowing it to rotate for disassembly. Honestly, it's a great little system. From here, we can see down into our shrouded hammer and some other components, but honestly, I'm gonna tell you, it'd probably be just best just to go ahead and look at this in an animation. First, we'll load this gun up and rack the slide. Being a blowback, there is no locking action to watch. Instead, focus on that trigger with its integral wraparound transfer bar, making for a nice, straight pull. When the slide is driven back, it presses down on the disconnector. This piece nudges the rear of the trigger bar, preventing automatic fire. Browning also included his simple grip safety. A projection on the safety just blocks the sear from rotating. That's all. The manual safety lever does the same, again blocking the sear on the other side. Otherwise, this is a fairly familiar pistol for most people, so let's let it play. And give it over to Mae. I will not lie to you fair folk at home. This is one of my favorite handguns from the war. It's just so dang cool. And yes, the cartridge isn't quite as powerful as 9mm Parabellum, but it barks so much louder than it bites because of that blowback action. It's a delight to shoot. Now, despite all of that, it really wasn't all that present in the war. It was there. It was certainly there in significant enough numbers, but not anywhere near as wide as you'd expect, especially considering the large numbers of some clearly inferior guns. And you kind of have to wonder why. Well, let's break it down for a second. We have 10,000 Swedish initial orders, and no one else picks up the ball on this gun, not until after the war. And so it's really not in a lot of countries, except for as an occasional privately owned, privately bought officer's piece. And even then, there are still more popular guns out there because if you're buying commercially to the side instead of a hardcore military model, you're looking for something light and handy usually, and this ain't that. This is an actual butt kicker. Now, a lot of the Swedish orders would, following the 10,000, they'd keep flowing in, but they flowed into a sales agent who would then go ahead and push them back out to officers who were buying directly from the factory instead of through the arsenal system, although they would still go through the same inspection process. This ended up producing an interesting variant that is somewhat uncommon or rare today, a stocked version of this pistol. Much like the C96, these stocks acts as a holster as well as including a slot for a spare 7 or 10 round extended magazine. They were sold commercially and in a number of smaller contracts for police, railway guards, and gendarmerie. Around 7,000 would go to Russia for just such a use, and likely played a role in the Russian Civil War. By the way, don't call me a liar because I said no significant contracts. These are police and pseudo-civilian organization contracts. These are not, I mean, paramilitary at best, let's go with that. These are not actual military contracts like the Swedish one was, but they're still kind of sizable, 7,000 to Russia, right? By the way, as a subset of that, there was actually a Russian gendarmerie version with a shorter stock, mostly in the way it was fitted. It's believed that that was done in order to allow single-handed attachment for horseback gendarmerie. Those are extremely rare. I don't even have a photo of one of those. Now, these guns also went into police paramilitary use in the Ottoman Empire. These were marked on the slide with the Turkish word authority and have the seal of Sultan Abdul Hamid II roll marked over the top. If you'd like to know any more about this particular gun or those fancy Russian models or any number of really cool Browning designs, please check out the book linked below in our description. It is an extremely valuable read. Grasping for straws, about 100 would go to Britain, and maybe 60 made it into the Royal Navy, along with some Chilean Mausers and other things. We're actually going to get into that story of procurement some other time. That's really not a big impact, 60 of these guys. But it spread out a bit. Unfortunately, though, you're seeing one neutral power. You're seeing non-frontline military use / more likely police paramilitary use by a couple of others. It's not a huge, magical, successful pistol at this point. And so, it really probably wouldn't have wandered into our show if it weren't for the fact that it was still in production and therefore sitting in inventory when war were declared. And as some of you know, as part of that war, Germany invaded Belgium. And because of that invasion, Fabrique Nationale, the producer of this particular handgun, they did not stay in business. As a matter of fact, the Germans would try to force them to reopen their doors, especially considering that the majority shareholders for the company were German. I mean, it was a remotely German-controlled arms factory, and yet management said no. We're not producing for you guys. And so, the Germans would have to just sort of strip the facility of usable equipment and parts, and, when they could, completed stocks of handguns, sitting around, nicely boxed up and ready for use. Once seized, German officers could purchase them for 48 marks. And if you had 59 marks, you would get a shoulder-stocked version all to yourself. Sadly, I couldn't find any commentary on how well liked they were, but there you go. The FN 1903 squeaked its way into the war. Just to recap, that means it's in Ottoman, German, and Russian hands, albeit way behind the lines in most cases. All pre-war production seems to roughly flush out to 37,000 guns, most going to Sweden. After the war, the 1903 would enter production again, this time getting a bit more recognition and seeing sales to various entities in El Salvador, Estonia, Paraguay, the Netherlands, and Spain, although they just bought the Estonian leftovers. Production halted around 1928 and totaled just over 58,000 units. Even after that, another country would still pick them up, although this time they would not be made by FN. Although that story requires a little bit of pre-explanation. You see, with FN shut down, Sweden could no longer buy these little honeys, and being a neutral power, it wasn't a huge deal at first, but it started to count for something when the war kept going on, and they couldn't always be guaranteed their neutrality. They had to stay armed and ready. And as part of that, they would need more model 1907s in their inventory. Now, to do that, they would have to produce domestically, and that's exactly where they went. They would turn to Husqvarna. I can't say when the gear up started, but Husqvarna had previously produced the model 1887 Nagant revolver, so they were likely well equipped to clone that FN 1903/Swedish 07 and manufacture it on their own starting in 1917. Now the first pistols didn't quite look like this. They were near clones of the blued, polished FN pistols. But over the years, Sweden would adopt a phosphate finish and apply it retroactively to pistols in repair. So most now have this gray coloration. Sweden did, by the way, pay a license to FN for the production of these pistols, although it's believed that this was negotiated and paid after the war, after it was already started. It doesn't appear that FN was too bitter, though, because when the Colombian government approached them after the end of production of the pistols in general, well, they went ahead and referred them over to Husqvarna, saying, well, the Swedes are still making them. And that's exactly what happened. The Swedes would produce for Colombia, representing the only non-FN contract for this particular gun. Alright, one last point of interest is this little marking here. After being surplused, many of these pistols were converted to .380 by the importer. This was because the 9mm Browning long cartridge had never had a good hold in America. The process was simple: swap the barrel and stamp the frame. Eagle-eyed viewers may have noticed that our particular gun had the same mark applied to it, on this side rather. It was not shot in .380 though. We just managed to get a hold of some surplus parts. The Swedes overproduced barrels, so replacement barrels are available, and they can be hand fit like I hand fitted this one. So this guy's been restored to 9mm Browning long. It just has a little scar, is not otherwise worse for wear. So Mae shot the original cartridge. Also, while we're talking about modifications of these pistols, you may notice some have half moon front sights, some have quarter moon sights. If you looked closely at this one, you would see that it used to have a half moon and later was trimmed back to a quarter. That's because the Swedish government changed their requisite to the quarter moon later on, and retroactively they were modified, or new production was done this way. So you can vaguely see how old your gun was that way. Anyway, if you have a half moon, congratulations, you have a commercial gun that avoided that whole process, and I hate you. Anyway, this is easily, like I said, one of my favorite handguns from the war. Very advanced, very wonderful, but my opinion is not the final one in this show. So we should take this gun over to Mae, who has been shooting everything under the sun related to World War I, and see how it truly stacks for her. Alright, we made room for Mae, and we made room for, well, the largest blowback we've dealt with so far. Let's go ahead and get your opinion on the FN Model 1903, the Modèle de Guerre, starting, as usual, with the ergonomics.
Like Othais just said, this is easily one of the biggest blowbacks we've shot for the series. I mean, this is about the size of the Steyr Han. That's a big honker right there. It's got a lot of weight to it, a lot of heft, yet it's very narrow. It's a very sleek gun. And interestingly enough, I'm looking at this gun, and up top, like the slide area compared with the grip, it seems a little bit disproportionate. It seems like the slide is actually, it's just bigger, like the grip isn't quite big enough to kind of fit with it. It's a bit off. I mean, granted, I'm still able to get a full finger grip. That is important and necessary, I feel, when it comes to these pistols, but it still just feels like they could have extended the grip a little bit. Plus, I wouldn't have minded the extra round there. That'd have been nice. Anyway, leading into more of the ergonomics, safety on here, it's fairly easy to operate, easy one hand off and one hand on. I didn't have any problems with it here or on range. The mag release, now, I've said it before, I'll say it again, I still don't like heel releases. I just feel like a button up here just is a lot easier, faster, can manipulate it, go, no problems. However, this is actually a decent heel release. I mean, it protrudes out really far. It's got these nice striations. It's almost like button shaped, and blah, I feel like I could do this fast all day. And they've added a nice little step out on the toe right here. That way I'm able to get a good hook on that with my finger. So I actually don't mind this one. Don't tell the other guns I said that, though. You know, don't want them spreading that around. Anyway, last but not least, operating the slide. You know, it's actually really easy to manipulate. I mean, even if someone dry fired this and the hammer was not like back, I still feel like it wasn't bad. It's not heavy. It's always very light. And I like that. I'm able to like easily operate the slide when I need to. Granted, I'm only doing it once when I'm loading the mag in, but I don't mind that. That's not going to be a negative in my book. But yeah, ergonomics wise, looks a little bit disproportionate, but in terms of everything else, this just feels like a military pistol. It's got that weight to it. I like it.
I have to agree. May I borrow that?
No.
Okay, but thank you. Anyway, the length feels great. The narrowness feels amazing. It does limit your magazine capacity because that narrowness comes with a single stack and only 7 rounds, and I agree with May. Especially with my large mitts, that's gone. I've probably only got 2/3 of my pinky really resting on the gun. Just one more round's worth, and it feels like it would be a little bit more balanced.
Now let me ask you, you're gripping it like that right now. Are you trying to grip it really hard in order to get that safety on the grip to really feel like it's pushed all the way in? Because for me, it felt like I had to really grip it hard in order to just positively push that safety in.
That's true. The grip safety on this gun is not quite as light as, say, like a 1911 or a Fromer. I don't know how to explain it. You have to consciously push the web of your hand into the gun. I'm not saying that I would sit there and have any misfires. Definitely on range, especially with my big hands, I was able to just point and shoot mostly naturally. I'm sure, though, for you, maybe you kind of had to consciously get a little bit of a white knuckle grip on there.
Not quite. It wasn't like a death grip, but I did feel like it was definitely needed a positive push in. That was something I noticed while shooting.
That's true. And again, that might have been something that was dialed in for safety. Like the idea that if you could just sort of like right now, I'm holding it up like this. The weight of the gun is not enough to depress that safety. I have to positively grip it. So just with the weight of the gun, it's not enough. Again, military consideration, military strength springs. Which is odd because, like you said, the slide spring is so light. We might see that bite us in just a moment because we're going to talk now. Let me give that back to you.
Thank you.
Walk us through actually firing the pistol.
Shooting, my favorite part. Could you tell? Anyway, these quarter moon sights, you know what? They're actually pretty dang decent. They're really tall for their time. That being said, they're one of the tallest sights I've shot for this series so far, which is great. Not great for modern times, but they're still pretty decent, so I'd have taken them at that time. The trigger, terrible. It's hard to believe it's related to the 1911 because this is an awful trigger. It's mushy, it's creaky, nothing about it is smooth, break isn't clean. Every fault was there. It wasn't great, but c'est la vie. Anyway, next but not least, of course, after the bango, the recoil. It's interesting. It felt like I was shooting a 45, yet the power that was coming out of it was less than 9mm parabellum, which is bizarre. It's a weird fit for this guy. I feel like they could have tightened up that recoil spring a little bit just to kind of help with that, but hey, beggars can't be choosers. I still shot well with it. It just meant that because of that recoil being as bad as it was, I had a longer reset time. My shots were walked out a little bit more, but yeah. It still wasn't bad with it. I still did well with it. And interestingly enough, last thing when I was shooting it, look at this feel. I mean, it just looks and feels like a military gun and for this series, I've been shooting everything one-handed, just how they shot back then. Yet I feel like I could easily grip this two-handed. This feels like a modern pistol. It's just got that look and feel to it, which is really interesting for a shooter, I thought.
Yeah, you got to give some credit to the fact that okay, we shoot two-handed. Everybody now is moved on to a very specific grip. We're not educators on modern shooting. That grip has to evolve from where pistols evolve from. It's this constant exchange. We make a pistol to fit the grip we want. We make a grip to fit the pistol that is best, and then it goes up the road. This, coming from 1901, has compatibility with modern handgun shooting. That's fantastic. That's insane. It's how advanced the Browning design is, and by the way, it's how much influence Browning had on modern handguns. Remember, this is the man who developed the modern slide, and it's his tilting barrel action that's still used, albeit modified, and we're going to see another gun that contributes to that later on. It's still in a lot of personally owned handguns today. This doesn't use that locking system, but it was cloned out of that same development cycle. So this is just a branch off of that development tree, and believe me, we're going to go down the whole trunk in a later episode. A nice, long, deep, US-centered episode that you all are going to love, and I will not have sleep for a month. Now, with all of that covered, I think we understand that this is the limit of a blowback action pistol that is usable. If we get lucky in this series, I would actually like to find at least one of two examples of unusable blowback pistols. If you have one, please let me know.
Please.
Anyway, I like this pistol. I'm going to give my opinion first. I care for it a lot. It has the same...
Wait. You're going to give your it's going into battle thing?
Now, I'm not saying into battle. I'm just saying as a collector. You're the battle, all right?
Okay.
I like it. It's got the bark of a Steyr-Hahn, and there's something about that note that they strike that both this and the Steyr-Hahn are the two most beautiful sounding handguns I know of. However, reasonably, intellectually, I know that it's just not packing the power I think it is. It's all bark, no bite. Not no bite. I mean, it's certainly better than a 380 or a 32. But realistically, what's the trade-off to get away with not having a locking mechanism versus the extra couple ounces to have this gun lock up and recoil better? It's tricky. All right, so we can forgive this for being sort of that missing link between the military pocket pistol and the military lock breech pistol. Where does it put for you, though? Is the missing link good enough to make the grade? Would you carry this into battle?
You know what? I have made my complaints known about this guy, so not getting back into that. It performed well on range, no problems, no misfires. I performed well with it. I would, honestly, yes, I would take it into battle. I think it did well enough. And you know what? I would put this guy above the 32s. I would even put it above some lock breech semi-automatics. Glacenti. Anyway, yeah, I would certainly take it into battle.
I feel like you might have almost given away one of the pistols we've found that is extremely rare.
No, don't go back and replay that.
No.
Why? Stop.
Anyway. All right, so that's going to wrap us up for the FN 1903. Definitely a workhorse, definitely reliable as far as we can tell. A little heavy-handed for such a light cartridge, but I ultimately would prefer it over 32 pocket pistols. You agree?
Yeah, me too.
Okay. Well, we're going to wrap out. There weren't a ton of these in the war, but we got to cover it, and it leads us into a very interesting next episode that I'm sure you will all stick around for. Have a good one.
Bye, guys.
All right, guys, update. I'm just going to add this on to the end of the episode. We still have a t-shirt campaign going, and by the time you're seeing this, I think it's roughly a week to go. I'll try to give a 24-hour notice as well, but if you want a C&Rsenal t-shirt, hey, we have one, sort of.
It's inside out. I just wore it.
And there's dog hair on it. Free dog hair with every... No, I'm just kidding. Actually, these are not made here, so there are no giant animals to pollute them. If you want one of these t-shirts, this is a men's small. If you want one of these t-shirts, head over and grab one at Indiegogo. The link is in the description. It's probably all over the tags. You have about a week left when this video launches. If it's well after, we're hoping to set up a shop that won't have the discounted bulk buy price, yada yada. We got a whole thing on it. Just head on over, grab one if you want one. And if you don't, that's fine too. Just keep watching.